All right, thanks everybody for coming out today. We are very happy to have the three candidates running for the Democratic nomination for Norfolk Commonwealth's Attorney with us today at our monthly Virginia Club Speakers Luncheon. This format will be a candidates forum where each candidate will have the opportunity to speak for 10 minutes, and then afterwards we will take questions and each candidate will have the opportunity to answer each question. So I will give a very brief biographical introduction for each candidate. We have randomly selected the order of the speakers. First speaking will be Ramin Fatehi. He's presently a Deputy Commonwealth's Attorney in Norfolk. He earned his bachelor's degree from Yale University and graduated from Columbia University School of Law. Second, we will have Amina Matheny-Willard. She's been a juvenile and criminal defense attorney for more than 20 years. She earned her bachelor's degree from New York University and graduated from the University of Richmond School of Law. And then third, we will have Zwisohn. She is currently the Chief Deputy Commonwealth's Attorney in Gloucester. She earned her bachelor's degree from ODU and graduated from Albany Law School. So we'll jump right into it. Ramin, if you want to come on up.
Afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be back at our club. It's nice to see those of you who are here in person, and it's nice to see familiar names and familiar faces on the other end of the computer screen. We are here today for you all to meet the three people who are looking to take on what one of our former club presidents, Evans Poston, has called more than once the most important elected job in the City of Norfolk, our city's top prosecutor, the Commonwealth's Attorney. Evans is right when he describes that office in that way. There are plenty of important offices, but the Commonwealth's Attorney is the only official in Virginia and the entire criminal justice system who is directly accountable to the people via a vote. I'm here to talk to you about why I am the most well-rounded, the most qualified, the most experienced, and the most prepared candidate to succeed our current Commonwealth's Attorney. I'll talk a little bit about myself, a little bit about what I've been up to, and a little bit about what my vision is for the office. Many of you know that I'm Virginia local of a sorts. I grew up in Tehran until I was almost 7 years old, and then my family, after moving back to the United States in the mid-'80s, settled here. I grew up in Virginia Beach. My father had a medical practice in Chesapeake and Virginia Beach. I had the privilege, thanks to my father's work, to attend Norfolk Academy and then go on from there to Yale and to Columbia. I went up north knowing that I was going to move back to Virginia, knowing that I loved our place and that I wanted to contribute to it. After I graduated from Columbia, I had the additional privilege of clerking at the Virginia Supreme Court for Elizabeth Lacey, the first woman elected to the Virginia Supreme Court. And I can tell you I learned a lot more from Justice Lacey in the year that I worked for her than I did in 7 years in school. After that, I made a mistake. I turned down a job as a prosecutor to take a job at a very large firm in Washington. And I figured it was probably a one-way street, that I would be able to go to prosecution from Washington, not the other way. Finding it not to be my liking, I chose to take almost a $100,000 pay cut and to become a public defender in the city of Richmond. My experience in representing the most unfortunate, the most indigent, and in some ways the most despised of the people in our society has shaped who I am and why I pursue the policies that I do as a prosecutor. I learned as a public defender that the vast majority of people who are accused of crimes in the criminal justice system are victims of circumstance. They are people who had doors systematically closed to them, from substandard housing to substandard education to parents who may or may not have been involved. All things that the philosopher John Rawls called morally arbitrary factors, things that these people did not choose for themselves. And that the end result was poverty, mental illness, substance abuse, and eventually jail and prison. The realities of being a public defender in Richmond also taught me something important about the criminal system, which is that the most powerful agent in terms of getting to the right result in the criminal system is prosecutors. I chose, therefore, to become one. I practiced for over 4 years in Chesapeake, where I specialized in white-collar crime and in scientific expert impaired driving cases. Spent a year and a half as a special assistant United States attorney in Charlottesville, where I prosecuted the only jury trial in the 18 months in that courthouse, and then over the last 8 years prosecuted here in Norfolk. Here in Norfolk, I've been involved in essentially every single one of the important cases that is answered to public policy. Our office prosecuted the chef whose whistleblowing led to the indictment of Bob McDonnell. I handled the bulk of the responsive pleadings and bulk of the procedures in that case in the city of Richmond when our office was called on to do that. I handled the intellectual heavy lifting on the case of the no-show worker at the Norfolk Community Services Board, and I was involved in the research on a number of other controversial issues, including the research on whether our city council could take down the Confederate monument in Commercial Place. A couple of years ago, our current Commonwealth Attorney asked me to consider succeeding him. I had to think about it, I had to talk to our Chief Deputy, and we all concluded that it was the right thing for me to do, to run and to take on the duties of this office. We have come to realize in the criminal system that over the past couple hundred years, a lot of the things that we've done in the criminal system we did because they felt right, not because they in fact were right. Not because they were backed by data, but because they were backed by either intuition or, in the case of so many things, from felon disenfranchisement to the expansion of felony punishments, were done with documented, historically verifiable racial and economic animus. And that it was our duty to ensure that what we punished and how had everything to do with what a person had done and not with who their parents were, what their race was, whether they were wealthy. It is essentially to apply science to the idea of criminal prosecution. The name by which this goes is criminal justice reform. I'm very proud that we have been able to advance some of those initiatives in our office. I have been involved in the litigation and in fact was counsel of record in the Virginia Supreme Court in our litigation dealing with the possession of marijuana, which had an incredible racially disparate impact here in the city. We were reviled, ridiculed. I got sharp questions even from members of this club about what we were up to. History has vindicated us and shown that we were correct. We have worked on questions such as whether a person should be held prior to trial or released based on their ability to pay. Again, there is no scientific or criminological benefit to doing so. I want to extend these things, both because they are normatively the right thing to do, but also because they save us as taxpayers money. There's nothing more expensive than taking a taxpayer out of society and then paying tens of thousands of dollars to imprison him for longer than he needs to be, and because it will help us deal with the root problems that we deal with here in Norfolk, which is violence and the disparate impact of violence on our different communities. Part of the purpose of criminal justice reform, in addition to ensuring that we prosecute by logic, is to extend a hand to the communities most impacted by crime. For better or worse, the perception is that the system does not work in disadvantaged communities. What that leads to is what my criminal law professor euphemistically liked to describe as self-help remedies, which is essentially taking care of it in the street and pouring more blood in answer to blood. I have specific substantive ideas about how we can address that. They include restorative justice, they include violence interrupters, and they include making very public demonstrations of the way, such as by dismissing marijuana cases, taking cash bail out of the equation, that we are trying to ensure that the brand of justice that those of us who live in Colonial Place and Larchmont is no different than the brand of justice that someone living in Huntersville or Berkeley would get. I'm the only candidate in this race, ladies and gentlemen, who has been a state prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, has tried a jury as a defense lawyer, has tried over 40 juries, including homicide juries, as a state prosecutor, and has practiced in federal court. I'm the only candidate who is going to be able to step in on day one and run one of the two most difficult offices to run in the entire Commonwealth. Our office with over 40 lawyers and 50 staff. Currently, I supervise a team of 6 lawyers. I'm also the only candidate who has appeared at 2 bill signing ceremonies, having shepherded important reforms through the system, having sat across from 2 different governors on initiatives that I've been able to advance, and who will be able to bring that sort of access and that sort of voice to Norfolk, not just here in Norfolk, but in Richmond. So this is the most important job that you can vote for if you care about safety, if you care about fairness, if we are all dedicated to the idea that if you work hard and you play by the rules, that you get ahead. And that is why I'm asking that you vote for me on June the 8th in the Democratic primary.
I want to say it's an honor and a privilege to be here. I'm going to say something that might sound surprising, but I concur with 99% of what Mr. Fatehi just indicated. The part that I don't concur with, I'm asking you to vote for me as the Norfolk Commonwealth's attorney. The reason, I've been a criminal defense attorney for over 20 years, so I have been in the trenches. I know what it takes to prosecute with compassion. What I'm going to do, I feel the best use of my time is to go through my platform. And as I go through my platform, I'll give you some examples that I've encountered as a criminal defense attorney. And out of the 20 years that I've been a criminal defense attorney, 15 of those were as a public defender. I've worked in the Norfolk Public Defender's Office, the Chesapeake Public Defender's Office, the Virginia Beach Public Defender's Office, and the Petersburg Public Defender's Office. One of the platforms that I'm running on is what I consider a Norfolk Community Action Partnership. My vision for the City of Norfolk is that we all don't just live here, but we live here as a community. I want all of us to know each other, not just know of each other. And where that fits into the criminal justice system and what the work that I've done as a defense attorney, I've had clients who come into the system as a result of substance abuse issues. I've been able to reach out to the Norfolk Community Services Board in order to get help in preparation for my case. I've been able to talk to police officers prior to court to sit down and discuss what happened on that day. And there's officers that have acknowledged, we know that your client has a mental illness, we don't think they should be convicted. We're able to go and talk to the judge about that client. That is what restorative justice is. I've talked to the Norfolk Parks and Recreation with regard to community service. So the idea of the Norfolk Community Action Partnership is basically to bring all of the groups that are in the City of Norfolk together in order to, I don't want to use the for crime prevention. I don't want to use the term fight crime, but for crime prevention. Another aspect of my platform is the integration of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office into the city. So having all of the partnerships with all of the organizations, and this includes clubs, civic leagues, churches, part of that would be the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, where we're sitting, at least until COVID's over, it would be Zoom meetings, but we're all discussing how we can make the city of Norfolk better. So that platform is integration of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office into the communities. The other aspect that I'm running on is restorative justice. And as I indicated, I have started doing that. I do that in many cases where I'm representing a client and I'll talk to the officer. If it's a resisting arrest, I'll sit down and talk to the officer, or I'll ask the officer if he can talk to my client and the officer will talk. If it's a citizen complaint such as a petty larceny from a business, they'll sit, the business owner and my client will sit down and talk, and we come up with solutions so that when I go to the judge, I can let the judge know I've spoken with my client, I've spoken with this officer, this is what we're asking you to do. Or I've spoken with my client and I've spoken with this business owner and this is what we're asking you to do. And so these are things that can happen now. It doesn't need, we don't need, legislation helps, but these are actions that can be taken now, that should be taken. The no cash bail system is another aspect that I know Mr. Fatehi discussed. A lot of people are in jail because they can't afford to get out, and that serves absolutely no public safety purpose. In addition, you're effectively being punished for being poor, and also it forces a guilty plea. If someone's sitting there for 6 months and the prosecutor comes and says, well, we'll give you 30 days, you can get out now, they're going to plead guilty. So they're giving up their right to a trial, even if they feel that they're innocent. So the fact that there are a number of people in jail just because they can't afford bail is something that I would change immediately. It's not anything that, again, needs to be legislated. These are things that can be done right now, and just that haven't been done over the past 5 or 10 years in the city of Norfolk. I would also address the concerns of the LGBTQ community. I have 2 sons. I have one son who is transgender and another son who is bisexual. So I am very familiar with the issues of the transgender, the LGBTQ plus community as it relates to African American males, which is sometimes compounded. My focus would also be on human and civil rights in general. Basically just making sure that everyone is treated fairly by the criminal system, and my focus would also be on separating the immigration system from the criminal justice system, separating mental health issues from the criminal justice system, separating substance addiction. I don't call it substance abuse, it's substance addiction, from the criminal justice system and what the criminal system. And what that would do is take the pressure off of law enforcement to have to deal with these types of issues. Law enforcement should have to deal with crimes, not people that have mental health challenges or substance addiction issues. As I indicated before, one of my sons, my 28-year-old son is in Williamsburg right now. Well, he's in Williamsburg at Eastern State Hospital. He has bipolar disorder, he has mental health issues, he has substance addiction, and he has a criminal record. So I am very, again, familiar on a personal level with all of these issues and what it takes to make sure that everybody in the city of Norfolk is treated with compassion during prosecution, is treated fairly, and I'm committed to making positive changes that will help business owners, civic leagues, clubs, everybody, law enforcement, in the city of Norfolk. I will not pay lip service to no cash bail. I won't pay lip service to restorative justice. Again, these are things that can be done now. I know how to get them done, and I will get them done. And I just, at this point, what I'm asking all of you to do is donate to my campaign. You can find my website at www.aminalaw.com, and I'm asking you to vote for me on June 8th. I feel that I'm very qualified to take on this position and make real change for the city of Norfolk.
I told him it was okay just to call me Megan because Zwisohn can be a tongue twister for some people. And I will say, as a 7-year-old girl in Brownies, when they tell you they're going alphabetical order to do apple dunking, and you're the last one out of 20 to stick your face in that water, being last is not great. In this situation, I will say being last is actually very helpful because I do get to say something similar that Amina said, and something similar that Ramin said, which is, in some ways, there's a lot of things we agree on, right? The big ways are in how we are different as individuals and how we came to our careers and how we have performed throughout our careers. So one, I just want to kind of put out there, I'm very proud today to announce that I have the support of Randy Wright, Tommy Smeagol, and Courtney Doyle, because they have gotten to know me. And what they know about me is that everything I do because I care. I came to prosecution specifically to work for victims. So when I was in 5th grade, my best friend had a stepfather who used to beat her mother. And I learned that if I was there, she was not stuck in the middle of that abuse. So you don't have words for it as a 10-year-old, you don't know how to explain it to people, but you learn very early that you can be a shield and you can protect people. And throughout my career, that is what I have tried to do with victims of crime. I ended up coming to Old Dominion. That's how I came down here in 1988. When I was there, I interned at the Her Shelter in Portsmouth, Virginia, and then I got hired right after school to be the Special Projects Coordinator. From there, I went to law school where I formed the Domestic Violence Clinic. I was a founding member of that. So it was still sort of what I was really thinking about. But I got to tell you, at that time, prosecution was far away in my mind. I was raised by, for lack of a better term, hippies. We lived in a commune for a while. I watched my dad get arrested for things that he believed in, for marches on Washington. I saw my mom in the women's rights movement march, and I remember my first little ERA march in the 1980s, with my little sign. I thought it meant ERA. Does anybody remember the detergent that was called ERA? I was like, why are we marching for ERA, Mom? And she had to explain to me what it was. So I came from a background that wasn't necessarily law enforcement oriented, right? So I decided, going to law school, I was going to try to lobby for women's and children's issues. Got out of law school and thought, I had just interned with the Division of Legislative Services, and Ramin can probably back me up. If you see how a lot of that stuff is done, you realize I need to take a more active role because of our part-time legislators. So I thought, what am I going to do? And I had a huge fear of public speaking. For instance, today would not have happened. I had a twitch right here. I would get so mouth dried that right? I decided to teach at college. I went to ODU. They hired me as a full-time professor for 2 years, and I got past my fear of public speaking. So what that tells you about me is that I jump in. If I'm afraid of something or if it's hard, it doesn't matter. I'm going to get in and I'm going to do it. And that's when I decided, how can I best use my career to serve victims? And it was to be a prosecutor. And I thought, if I could get and work from the inside to make those changes, that unfortunately it has taken way too long for people to understand need to be made in terms of social justice, that maybe I could make a difference. That maybe I can make a difference in that system that my father railed against and that my mother protested against. When we lived in Staten Island, she was a safe home, fair housing chairperson and tried to protect a house that ended up getting burned down by a police officer, right? So again, I'm entering this with people in my family going, what? What are you gonna do? You're gonna be that person? And I said, absolutely, I'm gonna be that person. If people who care about other people stay out of every profession, nothing changes. But then I started doing the work and I realized even more how important it is to serve our community and to serve each and every person in the community. I've done this for almost 24 years now. I haven't basically missed a type of case. I was deputy of juvenile team. I was deputy in Norfolk of the special crimes team, which was the high dollar financial crimes that Ramin was talking about. And I do want to just kind of remind people, the worker that didn't come to work, that was actually Judge Poston who created a special grand jury because the office refused to bring charges at that time. That was after I left. So I go to work every day with a smile on my face, not complaining about having to manage people. I ended up leaving Norfolk for some very specific reasons, and it had nothing to do with the city, and it had nothing to do with the line attorneys in that office. But doing that, I got an opportunity to be chief deputy in Gloucester, which means I have been management all the way through, hiring people, firing people, creating the budgets, doing those types of things. I even got to be the Commonwealth Attorney for several months when my former boss made it to be the court. She actually just made it up to the circuit court at this point. And here's one of the biggest differences. If we're going to be strong on violent crime, we have to be successful in prosecuting violent crime. I can't tell you how many juries I've tried. I lost track. Almost all of them, violent crime, crimes against children, crimes against women. And for 10 years, I was the lead instructor for what's called trial advocacy for prosecutors. I was voted as that person who ran that course to teach other prosecutors how to try a case successfully. We need that today. Norfolk deserves better than it has gotten. It deserves an attorney who is not only going to be present, but is going to be able to train and lead and be in the courtroom on a regular basis with their attorneys. We need to build trust not just with the community, but we need to build trust with the law enforcement as well. My attorneys will be going to the scenes of homicides. I've already spoken to Larry Moon about the opportunity for me, myself, or a deputy to go to ComStat, which is their command stat, where they all get together and tell the chief what's happening in every different community. And in fact, he got upset with me because he hadn't thought of it first. That someone in the prosecutor's office is not speaking with the police department on a regular basis to find out what neighborhoods are suffering from what crimes. That's what we need to be doing. In terms of being in the community as a member of the community, of course we should be going to civic leagues and doing these things, but we also need to be doing it as individuals. If you truly care about where you live, you're already out there. I've spent years working for programs that serve underserved children, just as me, not as my title, just as me, because we know that if a child can't read, that's more likely that they're going to end up in the criminal justice system. So I go and I work for REACH, and I volunteered in 2007 and continued on to go to shelters and make sure that kids know how to read and to teach them. I work with Teens with a Purpose because this work is important to make sure that teens have a place to go, have leaders, learn how to lead themselves. All of this keeps people out of the system. So the reason why I think you should vote for me is not only because I've done the work to keep people out, but I know what to do when they get in. I know what to do with a case and to value a case when a business is broken into or a child is harmed. I've actually won an award for what I do in juvenile court. Norfolk deserves someone who could do all of it and has proven to do all of it. And I thank you for your time today. I have a little time left, but the one time I got to argue before the Court of Appeals, I asked the clerk, what's some advice? And she said, you don't have to use all their time. They love it if you sit down early. So I'm gonna say thank you, and I appreciate your time today.
Right. I'm gonna open it to questions. So we'll try to accommodate everybody on Zoom. It might be easiest if you send a message and then I'll read it. And then I'm going to arrange these chairs to space out. All the candidates will have an opportunity to respond to each question. So in the live audience, do you have any questions? Glenn has one.
I have one. Each of the candidates has an impressive record of being a prosecutor and/or defense attorney. But if elected, their role was substantially changed to being more of a senior partner, managing partner of a law firm, and a CEO, if you will. So I would like to hear from each what their philosophy of management would be in running the office of Commonwealth Attorney.
Okay. For those on Zoom, just to repeat, the question was essentially, please explain your philosophy of management, since you'll be going from a criminal defense attorney or prosecutor to more of a CEO or managing partner of a law firm. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to go out of the order that we spoke in just to change things up. So Megan, why don't you go first, Ramin go second, and then Amina go third.
So my leadership style is to lead from the front, not from the back. I think one of the ways to sum it up is people I have talked into going into different careers are actually supporting my campaign. Because when you lead with positiveness, when you lead and tell people what they're doing and remind them every day that they are doing what they're doing because they are helping our community, they want to follow you. They want to do what you want to do. The other thing that is become very apparent over the last few years is attorney wellness, right? I think we're all seeing from the bar, those people who are attorneys, not everybody here is one, sees that attorney wellness is huge. And I'm actually the one that they call, the Virginia Association of Commonwealth Attorneys has called, the Council for Virginia Commonwealth Services Council, and other locations to call to educate supervisors on burnout and what we refer to as vicarious trauma. And I will continue to make sure everyone in the office gets treated fairly and happy to show up in their job every day.
Glenn, excellent question. The minutes, probably about 10 minutes short of what I would need to give you the full story. It's on my website, fatehinorfolk.com. My management philosophy is that we treat everybody humanely. I learned that following my father around in the hospital as an 8-year-old. He knew the name of everybody from the fellow surgeons down to the orderlies and the janitors. And he told me, you make sure that I have to treat every one of these people with dignity because I can't do my job without them. And that's the philosophy that I've brought, and that's the philosophy that I'll bring to the office. I intend to work on our office's morale and on our office's relationship to the community by restructuring it to ensure that our lawyers are engaged and are tighter with their communities.
I would describe my leadership style with 2 words: camaraderie and inclusiveness. When I was at the Chesapeake Public Defender's Office, I was the supervisor of the juvenile court team. And I think it's important that the people that you work with feel comfortable coming to you, that you're approachable, that they can ask you questions, talk to you about the things that are going on in the office. So I've had that camaraderie and inclusiveness throughout my entire career in the public defender's offices, also as a supervisor, and even the paralegals and the secretaries come and talk to me about what's going on in the office. I was a paralegal for about 15 years before I became a lawyer, so I know that there's I don't want to use the term office politics, but I know how to deal with all of it. I know how to talk to people, the secretaries as well as the attorneys. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Linwood.
I guess it's a sign of old age. In the old days, people running for Commonwealth Attorney told you how they were going to be tough on crime. I don't think I've heard that today.
All right.
I know that there is a lot of there's a lot of social justice and movement in the criminal system going on. In terms of my position, I think it's important. There are cases, rapes, robberies, murders. There are very serious crimes that are committed where people should remain in custody and should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I truly believe that. I think the focus now has been on making sure that the social justice issues such as substance abuse and mental health don't get entangled with the criminal system. So I would definitely make sure there are people that need to be locked up. So though that would not go away with making sure that the people that don't need to be locked up are dealt with more appropriately.
So tough on crime goes to a little bit of what I was talking about with, it's one thing to be focused on violent crime, but you have to be successful in prosecuting violent crime, and you have to hold people accountable. There were years people saying, I'm going to be tough on crime, I'm going to be law and order. Today, the way I feel about it is it's not about being tough or soft, it's about being smart. It's about making sure that the right people are prosecuted for the right things and that they are held accountable for each and everything they did. And it's one of the reasons why I come back to victims all the time. Because I think one of the things that we have gotten away from, while I agree with much of what is happening in the legislature, I don't agree with all of it. And I think victims of crime have been left out of that discussion. And they need to be number one. We have to always come back to what the absolute mandate of this office is to keep people safe, to represent victims of crime. That's why laws are created, is to represent those victims of crime.
Folks, this is one place where you'll see that the overall philosophies are going to sound the same, but the rubber is going to meet the road in different ways. Criminal cases are not styled victim versus defendant. They are styled the Commonwealth of Virginia versus defendants. We have a moral obligation to be empathetic to victims, to take care of them, to nurture them. We are not obligated to be their lawyers. They are not our clients. What we do is we follow the dictates that are followed in federal court, which is that we pursue a sentence that is sufficient but no greater than necessary to protect the public and to punish a criminal. If 5 years is sufficient, 50 years is not 10 times as good. 50 years is injustice. And what we do is we look at what is right, not for an individual, but for all 250,000 people in Norfolk. And that is what I believe is what it means to be tough on crime.
Any other questions from the live audience? Okay, any from the Zoom audience? All right, I don't see. I've got one, and it kind of goes to what Linwood said. Growing up in Norfolk, I remember that there were certain places that were not as safe to go to. Downtown, for instance, when I was growing up, you couldn't go on Grammy Street. There was criminal justice reform in the 90s. Things became safer. I worked at the Commonwealth Attorney's office as an intern. And I would hear from police officers and prosecutors that when the sentences for certain crimes went up, that it became a deterrent, so that you didn't have someone say, well, if I kill this guy, I'll get out on parole after 5 years. So murders went down. So what do you all say to the people who think that, well, if you lessen the sentences, then the deterrent factor is going to go away and crime rates are going to go up in the city? Is that a legitimate concern to have?
John, that's an excellent question, and it's a fair one. Unfortunately, we've known, even from economic theory, that rational actors, even when it comes to business decisions, aren't necessarily rational. They operate sometimes on imperfect information and sometimes on their own implicit biases. Frankly, the average person committing a crime has no idea what the average punishment is or what the average length of punishment is. Having been both a defense lawyer, having spoken to accused people, and having been a prosecutor, I think perhaps the only place where deterrence and a cost-benefit analysis comes into play is in white-collar, high-level crime, where we can count on Michael Milken to know what the penalties are going to be when he steals $100 million. It is inconsistent with the real world to think that a shooting in Tidewater Gardens is going to be affected by what the theoretical mandatories are going to be.
So first what I'm going to do is what I did before, is I concur. I've represented thousands and thousands of defendants, and they don't have an idea of what the crime that they committed carries. So I concur. That is not a deterrent with regard to crime. What I'm focusing on are, it's better to just give an example. Someone who is picked up for a trespass charge, sleeping on the bench because they're homeless. They go to jail, they don't get a bond, or they get a $1,500 bond, but they can't make it. So they're in jail for 6 months, especially during COVID, until their trial comes, and when their trial comes, they're found guilty and given 30 days in jail. So those are the types of cases that I think all of us are talking about. And then there's other cases where someone might commit a felony, but they have a good job, and if they get the felony conviction, they won't be able to keep it.
John, you touched on one of the reasons why I don't really like the word reform, because it's sort of beauty's in the eye of the beholder. In 1995, reform meant we get rid of parole. Today, reform meant we're bringing parole back. What I'd like to bring back into the discussion purely and simply is accountability. People need to be held accountable for what they do, and they do need to be held accountable appropriately. Unfortunately, because we have set up a system of guidelines that is based on whether you have parole or not parole, we don't know what the appropriate sentence is beyond the community telling us what they believe, and that's why we have to be in the middle of the community and part of it to hear them out and hear what people think. Getting rid of jury sentences, the reason why that's not going to happen as much, because if we had just given juries the range that judges have, we could have honestly known what each and every person in this room, if you sat on a jury, believed a crime was worth for purposes of sentences. Thank you.
Baker, I have a question.
Okay.
Restorative justice is a lofty term, right? It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so my question is, and I think our community, Norfolk, has its own specific issues, so to speak, or opportunities. What cities have you looked at nationally that you may pull from? Any specific programs that they have that you've looked at and said, you know what, I can bring that to the city of Norfolk?
All right, the question was, restorative justice means different things to different peoples. Are there any cities nationally that you all have looked at to see if there are programs that have been implemented there that you would like to borrow and bring to Norfolk?
Well, one is Gloucester County. We started it in the high school with restorative justice. The school started doing that. Of course, with COVID, things kind of fizzled out a bit. And our only real concern with that was just to make sure it wasn't victims of some sort of sexual assault in the high school, right? It had to be okay for the victim to want to be part of restorative justice. And for those who don't know what that is, there's so many different definitions, but the broadest sense of it is that you have the victim and the defendant essentially with a mediator confront each other and talk through like why they did what they did and how it made them feel. Now, honestly, I can't tell you a city. I've read so many different cities. I was on a national call last week about diversion programs, and there are restorative programs a lot for that sort of mid-teen age, right? There's that age that they're not quite juvenile court, but they're adult court, but they're still needing maybe something a little less than court. And we've also, I've also done a lot of research in terms of, and I'm getting ready to run out of time. I apologize about that, and I'll answer the rest of that later.
To answer your question, I have not looked at other cities. I have dealt with restorative justice the first 10 years as a public defender. I did juvenile court, and there was a lot of restorative justice taking place in Virginia with the juvenile court system. What I can tell you, however, is practicing as an attorney, as a defense attorney for the past 20 years, I literally practice restorative justice every day. Just the examples that I gave you, where I am sitting and talking to, I can give you it's better for me to do specific examples. There was a case where I was representing someone for resisting arrest. I talked to the officer about what happened. The officer said, you know, he was going to release my client on a warning if he had just, you know, done what he was supposed to do. I got them together. My client apologized. We went into court, asked the judge for a dismissal, and that was done.
So criminal justice reform really means using an iterative process to improve the system. That means that when things don't work, we change them. Restorative justice at its core gets to something that many victims want, which is closure and understanding. I would look to Arlington County, where the first Iranian-American prosecutor in the nation, my friend Parisaw, is bringing a program in courtesy of the Annie E. Casey Foundation. I intend to follow her lead. In fact, in our office, we are waiting for the grant periods and grant solicitation period to open to apply for a restorative justice program now. We have had this in process. Norfolk had a juvenile restorative justice program that was one of the first in Virginia. The purpose is to try to find a way to bind up the wounds from crime, and just as importantly, to ensure that today's crime doesn't lead to tomorrow's retaliation, at least to today's closure. So I strongly believe in it. Look at Arlington.
It is just a few minutes past 1 o'clock, so I think we'll wrap it up with that. Amina, Megan, and Ramin, thank you all for coming out today. It's been very informative. Thank you for those of you on Zoom for attending, and those in person, thank you for attending. I've got some feelers out for our March speaker, so we'll have some announcements about that coming up. We are going to do a March Madness event that we'll send some information about as well. And hopefully, now that the governor has lifted some of the restrictions effective March 1st, we'll be able to do some more things at the club pretty soon. So thanks everybody for attending today, and look out for some emails on some upcoming events.